Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 252 today of Level Up. 60 minutes, of course, of live Q&A where your questions really do drive the show. Today, we're going to be discussing business case creation and why writing a better business case is such an important skill to be able to master. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, then you can find out, of course, so much more about what we do in our channel. So do consider giving this video a like and subscribe to find out so much more. Blanche is over in the social chat. So if you're online live with us today, do introduce yourself, please. Give her your name and the city from where you're joining. She's going to post some links in so that you can vote up the questions that you would most like answered by the panel. And of course, for you to be able to add your own as well. And if your questions are selected, your name's going to appear at the credits at the end of the show. So do get yours in early and stay with us to see all of that happening. We've got a brilliant panel for you today, so let's jump straight in and meet them all. Karen Newnham is a principal business analyst working for the Coal Authority here in the UK. She leads a team to help shape and deliver their portfolio and draws upon her experience of both private and public sector organisations in doing so. A regular contributor to her profession, Karen authors articles, joins podcasts, and runs local networking events as well. Very busy lady. Welcome back to Level Up, Karen. Great to see you today.
Great to be here, Nick, and pleased to be on such an impressive panel.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Sarah Olaifa joins. She works also in the public sector here in the UK, leading and delivering complex projects, ensuring successful implementations while always adhering to the regulatory frameworks that govern them, always fostering a collaborative environment through open communication and knowledge sharing and feedback and so on. Sarah has also recently launched her own podcast, which is definitely worth a listen. And we'll put a link in the chat for you. It's called Divine Enigma, and it showcases her passion for neurodiversity in the workplace. So welcome to Level Up, Sarah.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you so much. And I love the introduction.
Okay, all right, then. Well, good. I've already added it actually to my subscribe list, so I'm going to look forward to listening in. Eileen Roden rejoins today, a familiar face, I think, to many in the Level Up community. Eileen is, of course, the co-founder of the professional body for PMOs. It's called the House of PMO, and the popular PMO competency framework. With a lifelong passion for all things PMO, Eileen is a fellow of the UK Association for Project Management and, of course, a regular keynote speaker in her own right. Welcome back to Level Up, Eileen.
Thanks very much, Nick, and can't think of a better way to finish the week.
Absolutely right. Do you know what? Fridays are a great day to learn things when we give ourselves a moment or two, and Level Up is a fantastic way to do that. I couldn't afford your hourly rate individually, Anil. I certainly can't afford it when you're all together like this. So I'm going to make the most of it and try and learn lots myself. Somebody who I learn a great deal from is Maurice. Maurice Diamond rejoins today. He's got a background, as you may remember, in complex procurement and the commercial side of projects. He's a leading tutor and coach for things like the World Bank CP3P qualifications over at Training Bytesize. And he delights in seeing all of his clients improve their project procurement and management skills. So I'm guessing that business cases are really at the heart of successful projects, Maurice.
Absolutely. And of course, the important thing is that some people try and do a project without doing a business case. So hopefully, we can say why that shouldn't happen today.
Never happens. It's never happened in the history of mankind. Enthusiasm overtaken good process. Who would have thought? John Woad rejoins today. He is also a business case and strategy consultant over at Baringa Partners, great organizations. They specialize in business cases, investment economics, and business strategy, and so on. His work has helped countless organizations improve outcomes for themselves, for their organization, and also for citizens as well. Welcome back to Level Up, John.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thank you for the kind introduction. Always a pleasure to be back on here. And yeah, looking forward to a good, lively discussion as always.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I can see lots and lots of folks joining in the chat. Of course, Level Up doesn't work without questions from the audience. So if you're in the audience, don't be shy. Introduce yourself, please. Tell us the city from where you're joining, and we'll do some shout outs to everybody who's joining in a few moments. Those questions then come into our question master, who for today is Charlotte Miller, who's joining us from the Thames Valley here in the UK. So welcome, Charlotte. Good to see you.
Thanks, Nick. It's a very sunny afternoon in the Thames Valley. I'm very much looking forward to this live episode on better business cases.
All right, well, very good. With no further ado then, I think we should jump in and put our first question to the panel, if we can, please.
Thanks, Nick. Our first question for today is from Olivia in London. Olivia asks, why is writing a better business case important?
Well, right to the heart of the topic, really, Olivia. So thank you very much indeed. So panel, what are your thoughts on this? Why is it that writing a better business case, rather, is such an important skill for people to be able to master? Eileen, why don't you start us off?
I'm going to start out just kind of at the business case is the crux of any project. It's the building block that answers, more important than how. It just says why. Why on earth are we going to do this? Why are we going to make the investment? Why does it have to be now? Why do we have to invest this amount of money? And it's a document that can be gone back to, or a number of documents that can be gone back to throughout the project and after the project, and always to kind of give us that why are we doing the work?
Absolutely right. Thank you so much indeed. John, your thoughts, and then we're going to go to Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I mean, I couldn't agree with Eileen more on that. I think it's so important to set out good context and good reasons for taking your investments forward. But I think there's also a bit for me about demonstrating value. And that's not just about being able to show that your project, your initiative is going to generate some benefits, but how do you contribute to solving a problem, achieving objectives, moving an organization forward? And I think that's a huge, vital piece of what we've got to try and capture in that business case.
Yeah, and there's that V word right up front, isn't it? What is the value in actually doing this? And of course, how we might measure value may vary depending on the work that we're doing, the industry that we're in, and so on. But I think we're going to come back to value again a little bit later. Thank you, John. Karen, your thoughts, please, and then we'll go to Maurice.
Well, you preempted me there a little bit, Nick, because I was going to talk about value and say that perhaps some of the better business cases that I've seen, I was going to focus on that word better, around thinking about value in the wider sense, maybe in the sustainability sense or social value. So that's important in a business case. And I also wanted to underline what Eileen said around the business case being something that you go back to. For me, a business case is important because you've got that place to go back to review where you are with what you're delivering, whether or not it is meeting what your expectations, whether or not you need to reevaluate your expectations and your view of value. So that's the importance for me as well.
And thank you so much for introducing concepts like sustainability, because I think in the past, people have, in their attempt to justify something that they're passionate about or believe thoroughly in, they've not necessarily broadened the horizon when they've been considering that value. What is the proposition of value? What is going to be different after this? And how is that going to be aligned with the organization's strategy or its purpose? There's a word that's used, quite a lot these days to combine, the outcome, if you like, of why an organization might exist and what it actually produces in real life. So thank you very much indeed. Some great thoughts there. So Maurice, your thoughts, please, and then we'll go to Sarah.
Thank you. Actually, I was going to just say that the great thing about better business cases is that if we adopt that particular approach, it means that we have consistency of approach, the fact that it's comprehensive as a business case and also complete. An additional thing actually is context, because over time, things change. And when we read a business case, we need to understand the context that was there at the time. So for example, an organization's aims and objectives can change over time. So it's important to tie back what we're doing to our strategy and to understand what we were doing at a particular time. A quick anecdote, if that's acceptable. Yesterday, I was with a client, and I was slightly concerned that when we were discussing business cases, they were telling me, oh, well, most of the time we just put a few words in an email because we know who we're talking to. And I was saying, well, that's okay as a one-off, but what happens if the person moves job or whatever? And it was interesting that during the day, people started to realize how important it was to have a good process and to adopt something like this. And I'm also passionate about sustainability. And just to mention that if you are involved in doing a World Bank business case, then it's mandatory now to have environmental and social feasibility studies as part of that economic evaluation. Thank you.
I agree with that, Maurice. Thank you very much. A colleague of ours, Chiara Manolfi, who is based in Italy, is working with a number of organisations around sustainability and ensuring that those requirements are actually highlighted. She's doing some great work on that. So it is definitely worthwhile considering. If you're not considering sustainability, there is a very, very important link now to not just commercial outcomes or reputation, but also funding, quite frankly, and getting the sign-off to do the biggest and the best approach rather than just something which is tickling at the edges. Thank you very much indeed. Sarah, final thoughts on this one?
I love everyone's response to writing a better business case, but one thing that I really think it's so important to kind of keep in mind is the data and the analytics around building your business case. The metrics are so important. As much as your project values and goals are so important within the business case, we've got to have the data to support this so that you know that going forward that you'll continue to keep in line with, does this make sense? Is it supporting the data that we have in order to drive the project forward so that we're not necessarily wasting funds on things that are not of value? So it's so important that we have that, and also managing risks, identifying potential risks and potential things that we can put in place to mitigate those risks whilst we are building upon the business case. So it's so important that those areas are really robust so that you have a good holistic picture of what it is you're delivering within the project.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Too often, very senior people, when they're interviewed in their kind of fireside chats, the interviewer will say to them, how did you come to take this decision? And they may reply with, well, it was a feeling, it was a gut instinct, this kind of thing. And whilst that's completely relevant, and we do take decisions as human beings based on emotion and somebody's passion for something and their vision, and help them translate that vision into reality, there's the rational part of decision making as well that says, does the data support your hypothesis? If it does, then surely that adds strength to your argument. If the data is flying in the face of your hypothesis, then that just changes the game a little bit. And you need to think carefully about how much risk do you want to take in pursuing that particular line of thought. So thank you, Sarah. Brilliant answers, panel, to our very first question, and a lovely question from Olivia to really kick off the show. Let's go over to social and see what we've got in terms of the audience today, people joining. Big shout out to Kath Convery, a regular contributor, as you know, and panelist, joining us from the Harwell campus in Oxfordshire, near the University of Oxford. Thank you very much indeed, Kath, for joining today. And Kenneth joins from Aberdeen, right up there in Scotland. I think actually, Kenneth, you may be having better weather today than we are in the Thames Valley. Looking at the weather map a little earlier, who knows? I'm sure you can let us know in the chat. Also today online, we've got Mark joining from Izmir over in Turkey. You may remember that Mark is also a regular contributor to the Level Up series, and he's saying, somewhat cheekily, that it's unseasonably hot in Turkey, and he's saying it's between 35 Celsius and 40 Celsius. Mark, you can go off, people. All right, my friend. Anyway, from a chilly UK, but it is sunny actually here today. I think we should move on. Thank you very much indeed, everybody who's joining us online. So Charlotte, if we can, we'll take our next question to the panel.
Thanks, Nick. Speaking of Kath Convery, Kath has asked a question. Do you agree facilitation is a key skill to write business cases?
All right. Facilitation then. John, in your experience, is facilitation a key skill to write business cases, please?
Yeah, I feel slightly guilty for having jumped in ahead of more experienced business analyst colleagues on this one. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more that it is absolutely vital. I think where we sometimes see business cases going wrong and where we're not developing either robust options or we're not evaluating risk and context or making really sound commercial choices, it's often because we haven't worked it through in the most effective way. And I think using workshop approaches, well facilitated, engaging discussions is such a powerful way to really be able to move that thing forward. Because I think otherwise, I just want to challenge this image that business cases are something that you can just go and sit in a dark room and smash at a keyboard for a couple of weeks and you walk out with a really good document. The process of getting to a business case is in many ways more important, more valuable than actually the document itself, because it's how you develop a compelling proposal that sits well, delivers value, complies with regulations if you've got regulations to comply with. And I think that you just can't really do that without being in that group work environment.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can paraphrase there, a compelling proposal. All right. It's something that, in its own right, it has merit in its own right because you've sourced that value, from the wisdom of the crowd. And Karen, you've also done a lot of this to help people come together and, collect their thoughts in a meaningful kind of fashion. Does facilitation help or hinder?
Facilitation helps for sure, but I think I would say to anybody that feels that they want to shy away from facilitation, use people in your team. There'll be people like BAs, like other people who will be able to do that facilitation well. What I think sometimes people sort of move into, so I was nodding away to what John was saying about that sort of really sort of talking about how you've got that collaboration and you need to go through that process and not going away in a darkened room. I think what happens sometimes is people go in that darkened room because they want to shy away from that collaboration, or they're sort of being pushed by, say, maybe one person to go into a certain direction with things. And for both of those reasons, a business case will ultimately fail. So yeah, if you don't feel you've got the skill set, and facilitation or any of that stakeholder management side of things isn't just putting a workshop in people's diaries and going on with it. It's there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of pre-work, there's a lot of post-work, there's a lot of sort of the right sort of challenge you need to do in those situations to draw out the information to gain that collaborative view. So yeah, use those people that are good at that too. Don't shy away from not allowing it to happen.
If I may kind of summarize, I kind of feeling I want to add another word into facilitation, and that word is fortitude. So if you're writing the business case, you need this inner strength sometimes to be able to do what Karen's just said, challenge and sometimes advocate, sometimes step back and listen, quite frankly, and balance all of those competing, voices out a little bit. Thank you very much indeed, Karen. Great advice. Let's go next then to Eileen, please, and then we'll hear from Sarah.
Well, I think I'm just going to build a little bit on what Karen said, because two aspects that I think are really important when we're doing facilitation. Firstly, facilitation starts, as Karen mentioned, long before you turn up at the workshop. And a good facilitator should make sure you've got all of the right people in the room to have the conversations. And it's very easy, if as John was saying, to kind of go and lock yourself in a room and give your perspective. But it's also a real challenge to think about who actually should have some say, because you actually want all of those people who disagree with the process, who actually think it's a complete waste of time, who are really challenging the investment, because you really need to understand kind of what they're seeing that perhaps you're not, So you need that kind of broad conversation. So sometimes when we talk about facilitation, we might think it's just kind of one workshop, but actually there's a series of workshops. And again, building on what Karen said, it's not just, I might be the world's best facilitator, but that doesn't make me the best person to facilitate the workshops about my particular business case, because if I'm pulling a business case together, I may very well have some biases of my own in terms of what I want delivered. And a really good facilitator will actually take you through the process in a very unbiased way and make sure that all of the right people and everybody in that workshop is going to have a say and be listened to and collect that information. And you as the owner of the business case, or the person responsible for pulling that business case together, can take that information and do the analysis afterwards, but actually allows you to contribute fully and give your opinion rather than having to worry about the facilitation process.
Indeed, absolutely right. Spot on. Thank you very much indeed, Eileen. Some great thoughts there. Sarah, your thoughts on facilitation, and we'll go to Maurice.
I feel like with facilitation of a business case, it is very key. It makes the key stakeholders be in alignment with what the organization's goals are. The problem is that sometimes when people are not on the same page and we don't facilitate one another's needs in terms of what their key roles are within the delivery of the project overall, it then becomes unclear because nobody's bringing everyone together, and then the communication becomes a bit confusing and people get stuck on what they need to do and no one knows what direction they're going. So when you have facilitation within a business case, you can then justify for resources to be brought into the business case, and there's a structure. People know what the value of this proposition you're putting forward for a project, and it also helps have more buy-in when you facilitate in a very cohesive and clear way. I think I've had issues in projects where, when there's been no clear guidelines of how it's going to be facilitated, there's been a cause of confusion and uncertainty on how a project will be delivered. And then we always go back to, okay, what's happening? Do we need to rectify this? Do we need to change this? So I think it's really key to ensuring that everyone's kind of on the same page when a project is being delivered overall.
Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you, Sarah. Some great advice there. Maurice, final thoughts on the facilitation and how key a role it plays?
I think it is, excuse me, I think it's essential to get the right kind of facilitator, because as we just discussed, facilitation is central to getting the project to move in the right direction. I would be looking for facilitators who are strong, independent, and also in some respects can act as counselors, because they should be able to deal with conflict and also personality types. Sometimes we need to discuss the things that people don't want to discuss, but at the same time, the facilitator needs to know to what extent that they can cover off these different issues and so on. So the other thing that's important about facilitation is giving time to the facilitator to prepare, and giving them background and context in order to undertake that facilitation.
I could not agree more with you. I think the effort, the pre-effort versus the workshop time and so on, the contact time is many to one. And the better prepared you are, the more likely it is that you will become an effective facilitator in those contact moments, if you like. And facilitation is absolutely a contact sport, by the way. Even if you are doing it virtually, consider it as such. All right. There's no kind of paddling in facilitation. It's springboard diving, and how many twists and flicks you wish to put in is down to your own personal style. But there you go. It's fully immersive, in other words. Right. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, panel. Now, Kath asked a question, and she's kind of been active in the chat as well, actually, making a contribution. Kath, of course, very experienced in this area as well. So, first of all, on that topic that you all mentioned, it was getting the wisdom of the crowd, in my words now rather than yours, gathering that input, if you like, and then building the consensus, kind of from there. So thank you very much indeed. Kath, for your thoughts. We really do appreciate your presence today and involvement in the chat. Okay, very good. Charlotte, if we can, I think we should move on now and let's take our next question because I can see them stacking up.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from JW. How can a good business case help to deal with the challenges of an uncertain political context?
All right. Now, political here is written with a small c. Okay. And I think from my time in consulting, I'm not sure if colleagues on this panel would agree or not, but virtually every project that I worked on, somebody on the team said, oh, this project is very political. For one reason or another. So trying to navigate that landscape within an organization, can be sometimes challenging. What are your thoughts, Eileen, about trying to kind of manage your way through uncertainty by using a business case, if you like, as a tiller?
Well, one of the great tools that's provided within the Better Business Case framework is a structured approach to actually looking through all of the options. And I think, sometimes when we're developing a business case, I often say a lot of business cases, we say we've got three options. And I always say, well, actually, it's three really masquerading as one. You've got one option, which everybody wants, but not in a million years is anybody going to agree to. You've got the do nothing option, which in reality, you wouldn't be writing a business case if you thought that was a real option. And so you've got this kind of middle of the road option, which you've kind of almost kind of predetermined and disregarded lots of things without documentation that kind of you think you can get past whoever's going to sign the business case off. And so having a proper structured approach, looking at all of the options, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses, and looking at the risks, particularly that are associated with all of those options, is a critical part of business case development.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think we're all nodding in absolute out and out agreement there that that's happened so many times. Karen, your thoughts, please, then we'll hear from John.
Yeah, so I liked your analogy, Nick, of the tiller. I think that's, you're using it to guide. I liked Eileen's points about the structure and using the structure. Yes, it can be used in the wrong way. So, people need to understand how to use it in the right way. And then I'm going to hark back to what we talked about earlier in the last question about good facilitation, because that starts to open up that space where, yes, you're going to get political disagreements. You will all the way through. That's inevitable. Small, big, you're going to get something. But you've done the due diligence to help everybody get to a point where, we might still have disagreements, but we are galvanizing around a business case that we're going to evolve from. And then when we get those inevitable issues, we can walk people back to the structured business case and have an open discussion about where we go from there. So I think all of that pre-work really it doesn't stop those political situations from happening, but it takes the heat out of them and it puts them into a context where you've got you've better manage those situations.
Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. And John, final thoughts.
Thanks. And I mean, wholeheartedly agree with what's already been said. I think for me, there's two specific bits where a well thought through business case can help you deal with uncertainty, big P or small p, political uncertainty, in that there's a strategic level, in that if you have spent the time in building your understanding of context in both internal to your organization and your program, but also the external things that might be out there that could influence you, that allows you to build the really strong options because you're doing it in full knowledge of what's going on around you. Then there's also an economic level, an options level piece of making sure you've really worked through some sensitivity analysis. You've looked at how much do things have to change one way or another before your preference for certain options starts to move, or before you have to take a different approach entirely. And having that put together really effectively as well is hugely important, because then if your context changes, you've gone from OBC to FBC, suddenly you've realized that your context has shifted, you can go back, you can test what that means strategically as a project or as a program. You can go and look at your options and see if that does enough to affect your choices. And it just really allows you to pivot much more quickly. I think, however, it does, to a certain extent, has to link back to Eileen's point of, making sure you've actually got different options that mean different things, and that it's not just here's one realistic thing and a couple of other random bits that we've invented so that we've got something to compare it to. So a lot of it is about that due diligence that Karen mentioned, but it's how do you build your understanding so that you can deal with those changes when the inevitable happens.
Thanks so much, John. And thank you, panel. Some great answers to that. And one thing that I will share is it's all about horizons here. And if you have a solid business case, it will transcend, it will bridge over your current time horizon, whatever that is, or whatever the uncertainty is. Doing good stands the test of time. Having worked for publicly quoted companies, where the cadence is very much focused on the next quarter's results or the current financial year's results, and having worked for privately owned ones, there's a different time horizon. It's an entirely different time horizon where you can build value over a longer period of time and still service the private shareholders fully in doing so. So situations do change, and whatever your situation is, how to navigate way through uncertainty, as the panel have suggested, be collegiate, seek input, manage those and engage those audiences around you and get them involved, help them help you out throughout a project lifecycle. All right. Charlotte, let's move on if we can do. Just before we ask our next question, though, I am going to invite the audience now to submit your questions. We're about halfway through, audience, so you're the producers of the show. So if you want to get a live question in, now's the time to do it. Put those fingers on the keyboards and get it into the panel. Charlotte, let's have our next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got another question from Olivia in London. Who is the most important intended recipient for a business case? And should the business case be written around them?
Who's the most important recipient for a business case? And should the case be written around them? Well, I'm going to just jump in and say it's quite scary if you're writing for one recipient or even one fragment of the organization. So my personal view is, what's the English expression for that? Bold. That would be very bold of you if you were to do that, and perhaps somewhat short-sighted. Sarah, let's mix it up a little bit. What are your thoughts first on this one?
The business case is really intended for the people who are spending the money on the business, on the project itself. So it would be probably the CEO, the CFO, anybody who is the director, or the people who are the shareholders. That is the key. You need to make sure that that business case is intended for them to exactly know what's going on and what strategies that we're making for the business overall. So I feel like technically it should be written around them, and they need to know what's going on, and there has to be some input in that. Although the business analyst would ideally put the business case together, it needs to be in line with the people that are essentially spending the money to see the project forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Sarah. Maurice, your thoughts, please, and then we'll go to Eileen.
So it's actually an interesting question, because the answer should be in the fact that it is a business case and not the case for an individual. So a quick anecdote, if I may. I was doing a project for a government agency a number of years ago, and the business case was going down a particular route. And I was called in to see the director of procurement and told that if the answer in the business case continued to be what was in it in the interim, then I would never work in that agency again. Now, if we'd been working only to that individual, the answer to the business case, of course, would have been changed, and therefore the solution would have been the incorrect solution for the organization. But we were working to the business, and the organization I work for, we actually appealed to the wider organization. And indeed, probably the wrong thing to say, but the director of procurement was put in their place. And I did work for that organization in the future. But the point is that when we do write a business case, it is important that we are cognizant of the person and the people who will be reading it, and we use language that they will understand. For example, I always say, make sure that the core business case is relatively short. Put all the complex analysis into appendices and annexes, and then the person who is reading it can read a good document, a good narrative, a good story, and then they can give the annexes to their detailed people, their economists, their financial people, and then they can look at the detail.
Thank you so much indeed. Eileen, your thoughts?
I think when we talk about the business case, we often think of very typically a Word document that's perhaps, kind of half a dozen or even up to a kind of a dozen pages long. And I think we forget that in the building of that business case, there are literally hundreds of pages of information that we gather, and lots of, we talked about already in terms of workshop output. And although holistically the business case is there to be read by the people who are making the investment, and sometimes that's internally, sometimes that's external to our organisation to get their sign on, there should be various lenses into that business case for everybody who's going to have to contribute to the delivery of that project. So resource owners are going to want to be able to look at the business case and understand what their people are going to be working on and why, and when they're required. You're going to have the finance people who want to be looking at the business case to understand where the funding is going to be required, and kind of when they're going to start seeing some revenue perhaps coming back into the coffers. The project manager and the project management team are going to want to understand the processes and procedures that they're going to have to work through to deliver that project. So although you've got this single document that's there to holistically get approval from the investors, you have to have different lenses into it for anybody who's going to be involved in the project.
It's such an important thing, isn't it? We may feel that we understand the case intimately, inside out, back to front, and so on. But the point of this is not about us, it's about other people. And you're so right, Eileen, in being able to enable others to understand it and to build their understanding around it. It's such an important aspect for this. So thank you very much indeed. Karen, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I guess my view really builds on Eileen's about Sarah was saying, you've got perhaps somebody who's funding this particular business case, but that's in context, right? So that's usually, unless it's a small startup, that's always going to be in context of a wider enterprise, and so will impact people within the business, people outside of the business, customers, other suppliers. So yes, you do need to consider those reviews as well. And Eileen said it earlier as well in a previous answer to a question, was about making sure you've heard those challenging voices and included those. Otherwise, the business case is going to fail. So, the question feels like it's the sort of questions that's saying, if someone's asked for something and they've got a very strong opinion, can I write it around them? And I think that would be, like I say, in anything other than a small business where you've got like one single owner, it would be very dangerous. And even in that respect, you've still got customers who need to tell you about what they consider to be value in this space, and how that business case, help you to understand how that business case is going to stack up. So yeah, I think I would be very concerned if you were just writing it in that way to focus in on one person's view.
Thank you very much indeed. A story well told is a good way, I think, to paraphrase some of the earlier comments. And Kath is also joining in the chat as well, sharing her thoughts on that. And also, to everyone's delight, I think, and thank you, by the way, as somebody who's read a lot of business cases throughout my career, she also goes on to say that she really does love a good annex. So there you go. So that's from somebody that walks the walk as well as talks the talk. All right, it's a good idea actually. So if you want to fill your boots, go and have a look at Annex 33B. Okay. Otherwise, let's press on. And on that note, Charlotte, let's move on if we can, please, and we'll take our next question to the panel.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from Purnam Thapa Magar. When you're starting your new project and you're new to project management world, how do you make sure that you've justified your business case?
All right, Maurice, start us off and then we'll hear from John.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, follow the processes that are in the Better Business Case guidance. That's the first thing to do. Secondly, make sure that you engage with the stakeholder community, identify and then manage and bring in. These are things we've already discussed. But something I'm not sure we've actually covered yet today is review, independent review. In the Better Business Cases approach, we have reviews after the strategic case, after the outline case, and then after the full case. And it's important to bring in people who have been independent of the story so far, that storytelling, so that they can test it with you. You should never consider a review to be the enemy. It's there to help. It's help and to improve and to make sure that you are comfortable with moving to the next stage. So that's what I would say.
Thank you very much indeed. It's rare, isn't it, that an author's first draft is ever published as a novel. And so one would hope that these reviews are genuinely independent in order to be able to ensure that the story is coherent and that we're not simply, it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy in this sense, that when you author something, you're a little bit too close to it, perhaps sometimes. John, your thoughts, please, and then we'll go to Eileen.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think a lot of it is about starting out from strong foundations. I mean, the Green Book would call it a strategic assessment. Other places we might call it a problem definition statement, but it's being really, really clear about what is it you're actually trying to solve with your business case. I think we often get caught into a bit of solutionitis. Someone's spotted something cool on the news and they want to figure out how to incorporate it into their business, and you retrofit the business case and make it work, but starting out really well, because that then I think helps with everything that Maurice was talking about, and the idea of that independent review, of continually seeking feedback and input and support and challenge is absolutely vital.
I completely agree with that. Thank you very much indeed, John. Eileen, your thoughts, and then we'll go to Sarah.
I think there's interesting in terms of the way the question's phrased. I'm reading new to PM world as new to project management, and we all know that project managers are often the people who pull the business case together. But I think it's always important to remember that actually the owner of the business case is the project sponsor, the project or program sponsor. And so, if you're new to project management, I would say lean on your project sponsor, which is a real challenge sometimes, because often the project sponsors are perhaps not as competent or as experienced as we'd want them to be. But I think that's a really good place to go for some help. And I think if you're a project sponsor and you're new to kind of sponsorship, so you recognize you own this, then lean on your project manager, who typically might have been through a number of these business cases beforehand, and listen. But remember, you can only delegate responsibility. You can never delegate accountability for the business case and what's in it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Eileen, completely agree with that. Let's go then to Sarah, and then we'll hear from Karen.
If you're essentially new to project management and you want to know what to do with a business case, just essentially understand what the business case is initially. So you'll need to know what the overview of what the project is, what the problem is, what the project description is, what any sort of finances, whether there's a return on investment on the actual project you're delivering, any risk you have to be aware of. Stakeholders, understand those stakeholders you're dealing with and just what your plan is from your project plan. If you're so new to project management, you really need to get to grips about the documentation required in order to understand the business case. And then you just do a lot of research. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You won't have all the answers. There'll be other people who are a bit more experienced than you, and they'll be able to guide you through, repeating or iterations of that business case to make sure that it is absolutely on point and you've got everything that you need. And just, making sure you understand what the stakeholder needs are and making sure that aligns with the strategic goals that the organization is looking for. But if you're very new to project management, just getting your head around it and just continue to keep improving on what you're doing. And that's what I would say to that person.
It's a dance, isn't it? I would describe it as a dance. If you're a new project manager, as the panel have suggested earlier, you should be working closely with the project sponsor. You need to dance with the partner that brought you to the dance, right? Okay. So work on that relationship, build that relationship, of course. And also don't forget, as colleagues have suggested, that sometimes project sponsors may be very strong on vision, but perhaps less strong in terms of figuring out how do you deliver that vision. So that's where your role and your experience can really add a lot of value. Karen, final thoughts on Burnham's tricky question about how do you justify your business case?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack from that question, and we've had some really great answers. I just wanted to add and sort of pick out the justification part of that question. So justifying a business case. So you start off with a business case. A business case basically is a bunch of good assumptions. Nobody ever gets to the end and finds that they perfectly aligned what they delivered and all the things that they said around the strategic case, the economic case, the financial case, the management case. I've missed one. But you don't get that perfect alignment. So for me, as the PM, you need to be understanding where those biggest assumptions are, where the biggest risk is, and plan your delivery around those areas, because that's where you're going to be able to add value in terms of proving or disproving that proposed business case, because it is proposed. It's not absolute. We don't know if, there's many, many examples of things coming out and costing a lot more or taking a lot more time or not having the same assumptions. So, this is important to remember that is what that business case is at the beginning, is a bunch of well considered, because we'll have done all the due diligence, but there's still assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, Eileen, your role, if I can bring you back in as an expert in the world of PMOs, can often mean that business cases are not just shelfware, that they're actually revisited and so on. So your thoughts on the justification element of the question?
Well, I think the important part is what we recognise what the business case is there to do. The business, we've talked about it's there to kind of justify projects and explain the why. And perhaps what I've missed out completely in my first answer was it also explains the why not. And so as a project manager, we're not there to prove why we should do a piece of work. We're there to pull a business case together with the sponsor that does the analysis to answer the question, should we invest in this piece of work? And I often, when we run the Better Business Cases course, we get people, oh, my business case didn't get through, we're going again next month. And you go, well, actually, we should celebrate when we get a business case that comes and says, actually, I've looked at the numbers and it doesn't stack up. And we should congratulate them and say, thank you, we've spent a few £1,000s, but actually that saved us spending hundreds of £1,000s on something that's not actually going to deliver anything. And I think, we want to stop that as early as we can in the project, but actually that revisiting throughout the life of the project allows us to say that at any point.
I completely agree with that. Project management careers are built on great outcomes, all right? And it's not straightforward when you're early career to be able to look forward with any clarity and imagine an unsuccessful project. I think we're all born with a degree of optimism in that sense. But actually, great point, Eileen. There are many great business cases that actually say, do you know what? It's a great idea. It might have real merit. But to be honest, it's not actually going to work. So from that point of view, step away from it, focus on the things that you can do, and make a difference for you, your colleagues, your organization, your clients, your customers, and so on. Thank you very much indeed, panel. And brilliant question, Purnam. I have to say, you packed a lot into that. So I don't think we were asking a practitioner level question there. We were asking a degree level question. So thank you for the nuance that was built into it. We really appreciate it. Charlotte, time is against us. So we're going to take our final question, I think, for today to the panel.
Thanks, Nick. Our last question. My apologies for the pronunciation of your name, but Efficientia Saloon. Is it right to add contingency to the cost of a project when estimating cost in a business case?
All right. So we always have our thoughts, don't we, around what is the investment level needed, and that cost is sometimes expressed in external spend, or it might be expressed in internal hours and effort and these kinds of things. What are our general thoughts, panel, in terms of being able to come up with cost estimates, if you like, for work which is yet to be done, and those scary bits, of course, which is it depends work packages in the middle that you don't really know quite yet. John, how do you even start from that point of view? Is there a good principle, some guidance to follow?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to start by not directly addressing the question in terms of contingency, but I think we've got to recognise that the levels of certainty around costing will change through the life of a program, change through the life of a project. And so you will constantly have to be going back and kind of revisiting that. There are things you can definitely do to improve your understanding. You can use reference case modeling. You can go out and look at sort of typical costs in the market and do that sort of should cost model approach. But there's always going to be an element of uniqueness, an element of uncertainty that you can't really get around. And so factoring in some contingency can be, and this is a slightly slimy consultant answer, but it can be a useful thing to do. I think what you've got to be really careful of is understanding the levels of contingency that you're applying. Seek always to reduce those as you go through and you build greater certainty around your cost. And also be really careful about the differentiating between applying contingency to the financial cost appraisal and not doing it in the economic appraisal, because you're looking at a very different picture. Although the starting numbers are the same, you actually process those two things in a different way. So it's not a very clear yes/no answer, but that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. I think it's a very informed answer, though, because there are a lot of dimensions to this. So thank you, John, for starting us off on it. Karen, your thoughts, and then we'll hear from Sarah.
Yeah, I'm also not going to give a very clear yes or no answer. I totally agree with everything that's John said about variance, and that picture is going to evolve over time. So just a quick one for me is that if you are going to build in contingency, be clear about what the contingency is and the assumption you've made behind it, and be clear when you're building up that financial model or whatever model it is, because you'll have built that up through various people's input, what they've considered or what they might have approached contingency, how they'd approach contingency. Otherwise, you're going to get an inconsistent kind of roll-up model. So, if approach it with eyes wide open, I would say.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah.
I just believe contingency is just so important because we just don't know tomorrow and the landscape and how things will change over time. So it's always good just to have in mind that, I'm going to put something aside or something extra. It may not be that much. It may be that much, but at least you have that, that cushion to kind of, to sort of step back on, because things change all the time. And being in projects for a number of years and having that experience, that projects can change from up and down, left and right, and you don't know. So the contingency is just there to kind of pad it out for yourself and essentially just, protect yourself from anything that could go potentially wrong or could cost more than you, deem as what you initially thought it was going to cost, just because of things will happen all the time. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you very much indeed. And Maurice, final thoughts?
So we need to make sure that we look at the definitions here. So when we're doing a business case, we'll be looking at the whole life cost. We then look at the risk-adjusted whole life cost. And for a lot of us who might be listening today, we think of that as adding in contingency, but it's not. That is simply looking at a risk adjustment, providing some reality. And I should point out that therefore, in a lot of jurisdictions, including in the UK, we need to be very careful that when we're doing our budgeting, that we don't add in additional contingency, because what then will happen at every single level is that everybody adds in 10% contingency. And by the time we get to the whole of government, we can't afford anything. And my goodness, what our taxation would be in that circumstance. So I think it's just important to remember that and to consider also not just the rules of the business case, but the rules associated with presenting budgets internally through the department and also through to, as I say, the whole of government.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, panel, for some very wise thoughts and sharing your ideas throughout on that one. I also agree with Maurice there that, and it's true in the commercial sector as well as in the public sector, if you are doing a risk adjustment, then be transparent and show you're working out. And then folks can understand it and they will buy into it or not, or they will challenge it, as the case may be. The worst thing that you can do is bury any kind of adjustment and then call it contingency as though this is some sort of, pixie dust that you should sprinkle on everything. Because the thing is, you will be hoovering for weeks and months if you're not careful, because everybody's dust accumulates. Now, on that somewhat domestic note, I think we should move to closing remarks, really. It's been a remarkable episode today. So thank you to everybody, by the way, who's been asking questions in the chat and so on. Let's walk round the panel if we can. Sarah, if I may, I'll come to you first, and then we'll go to Karen.
So in terms of business cases, make sure that you're thorough with them. Make sure that you know exactly what the business case is. And if you're new to project management as well, make sure that you get the support of your project sponsor and anybody around you to make sure that you are really making sure that you have a really robust case, particularly now where we have so many changes happening. So yeah, I would have that as my closing remark in terms of business case building.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Sarah. Karen, and then Eileen.
Yeah, I wanted to thank the audience for such good questions and a lot of good themes in there. So I hope there was enough for everybody. The one thing that I wanted to just sort of highlight was that came out for me is that collaboration and that sort of collegiate way of doing things. Business cases are unlikely to be successful without taking that approach.
Absolutely right. You are but an island if you're working on your own, and the strength is in the team. So thank you very much. Eileen, your thoughts, and then John.
Well, we've talked quite a bit today about some of the skills that are required to build a good business case, a better business case. And I would also think it's worth looking at behaviours in terms of, kind of what behaviours we have to display to get a better business case. So, good integrity, openness and honestness we've talked about, but, and Karen's just mentioned collaboration. And I think there's a lot of kind of soft skills we need to really kind of brush up on to get a really good, effective business case, because some of the topics we'll talk about and some of the things that we'll explore will be quite emotive for people. And we have to help people discuss that through and be able to present that back in a palatable format that really gets to the nub of some of those issues.
Thank you very much indeed. Some great advice there. John and then Maurice.
Yeah, thanks. I'd echo what Karen said. I think some brilliant questions coming through that have, there's been a couple of good head scratches that have made us work for our appearance. So I'd probably take us back to some of the theme of that very first question, actually, which is, especially in the quite challenging environment I think many countries are finding themselves in this year, with a lot of political change. We're going to see a lot of changes in policy, changes in spending. For me, it's about coming back to value. If your business case can really talk to value, so not just benefits, but how are we collectively generating a picture of moving an organization forward towards its objectives, then we're doing the right thing in the business case.
Thank you so much indeed. Maurice and then Charlotte.
So I think we've had a really good discussion today. And one of the things I'd like to just come back to very quickly is the fact that when we are reviewing a business case and it's decided that the value is not being demonstrated, that either we have the opportunity to go back or we say, that's it. But that's it does not mean failure. And there is this big issue that people think, and they describe the ending of a business case at an early stage as being failure. It's not failure, it's success, because that's why the process has been designed in the way that it has been.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much indeed, Maurice. And Charlotte, a fascinating hour for us. It went by very quickly, actually, today.
It certainly did. I think the one thing that I've taken away from today is that better business cases and writing a business case is super important. But the one thing to remember about that important document is not something that you write and you put away in a drawer once it's approved. It's very much a living document. And as we've all mentioned, the political situation at the moment can affect that document. So therefore, it does need to be living and can be amended.
Thank you so much indeed. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to thank you on behalf of our producers. We have a lot of people online today. So on their behalf, thank you very much indeed, panel. Now, if you're watching online and you are mentally connecting with some things that the panel have suggested and their thoughts for today, then you can connect with them on LinkedIn, of course. Do go to apmginternational.com. Click on events and you'll find today's panel all listed on today's event with a little button that you can click on and invite them to a connection, to become a connection on LinkedIn. So it's that easy, very simple for you to do. And I would recommend doing that. Please don't sell the panel anything. That's not what we're here for. But we would welcome genuine professional connections. All right. So please do reach out to us. That would be lovely. And similarly, so on the panel's behalf, thank you, audience, for some brilliant questions today. It really is fantastic. Now, over on the APMG International website, as I mentioned, you can also search for the answers to more than 2,300 previously asked questions. It's totally free of charge and it connects you with experts from all different disciplines from all over the world. So do have a go at that. Don't forget that you may also listen to the audio versions of the shows on your preferred podcast platform as well. Now, looking ahead on Monday the 10th at 8, we're going to be looking at how to become a business relationship manager, before jumping into a webinar, actually, on Wednesday the 12th, 3 p.m. UK time, I think it is, that we're looking at why are employers hiring business relationship managers in such large numbers. So it's a great career. So do join in with that. There is a registration link, actually, on our website. Friday the 14th, the team are going to be looking at why certifications actually matter when building your career. I won't join you for that event. I'm away actually next week, taking a little break, but I'll be back with you again the week after. So really good. Don't forget that you may also head over to our YouTube channel and give this video a like. Do subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps others to find the content. And just ask, and we will, of course, send you a personal summary of what's coming up and how you too can join us here on the panel and level up your career with APMG. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great weekend.